Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to MaD for having me here today. It's really an honor. So today, I'm first going to be speaking to you about microfinance in China. But let me introduce myself first. As I mentioned, about 4.5 years ago, I moved to Beijing. And 4 years ago, I was lucky enough to start a microfinance nonprofit called Wokai. And so Wokai essentially, oops. Okay, what we do at Wokai is we connect contributors all around the world, like yourselves, directly with borrowers in rural China who are living under the poverty line and want to start small businesses. You can read their stories, browse their profiles, and contribute as little as $25 to support their loans. You get to watch as they build their businesses, repay their loans, lift themselves from poverty, and once that's done, you get to redistribute your donation to support someone new. We started about 4 years ago, and we launched our website live 2 years ago. And over the last 2 years, we've supported over 600 people living under the poverty line in Inner Mongolia and in Sichuan province to start small businesses and begin the process of lifting themselves and their families out of poverty. Before I get any farther, how many of you know about the concept of microfinance? That's great, so almost half of you. For those of you who aren't familiar with microfinance, let me give you a quick introduction. Essentially, microfinance is financial services for the poor. The most popular form of microfinance is microcredit. So small loans to the poor so that they can start small businesses. These loans don't have collateral. It's based off of trust. And as these borrowers build their businesses, they're able to repay their loans and lift themselves and their families out of poverty. So today I'm going to be speaking to you about microfinance and the role it's going to play in really defining the China that we see of 2031. Before we get there, I wanted to ask you guys, where do you see China for the average citizen 20 years from now? Would you say that the average citizen in China will end up in about the same position as someone in Hong Kong? Would you say someone in China is going to be better off than someone in Hong Kong today? Hands? Worse off than someone in Hong Kong today? I guess the rest of you are about even. So that's interesting. I guess when many of us think of China today, we think of the growing skylines of places like Shanghai and Beijing and places in this photo. What we don't think about so much is kind of the other side of China. When I arrived in Beijing, this was very much what I saw. And so I'm going to tell you a story that I had that took me to being here with you guys today. About 3 months into my time in Beijing, I went to a restaurant every day and got to know a migrant worker named Zhang Chunmiao. Zhang Chunmiao was originally from was originally from Heilongjiang province up in the northeast of China. And she was working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week in a restaurant just to get by. We became friends and she took me back to her dormitory. And essentially 8 people were living in a room about this big. All of them were working every day just to earn about $100 a month. And they're going to be stuck in this cycle of poverty, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. Their only other options were to go work in construction, work in a factory, or work in a restaurant. And so I thought, well, I think I could help Zhang Chunmiao out if I maybe could teach her English. And eventually she could go work for a hotel, work for a restaurant, and get out of that cycle of poverty. She made a lot of progress. And so we worked together for about 3 months. And one day I went into the dormitory and we were just going to do our normal class, and she sat me down and she said, look, I love what we're doing, and I really appreciate this chance to have more opportunities, but the reality is that I'm forever going to be stuck in a cycle of poverty. in 5 years, I'm going to have to move back to the countryside to get married. And there's nothing we can do to change that situation. And sitting on the other side of the sofa from someone where the only difference between Zhang Chunmiao and I was that I was born in Oakland, California, and she was born in rural Heilongjiang province. And if the tables had been shifted, I would be saying that to her. And while she was one of my best friends in the world, there was nothing I could do to change that situation. So I started looking for models where I could give opportunities for people like Chunmiao's parents to increase their income, send their children to school, and make sure that didn't happen for more people in the future. So let's go to rural Sichuan. So I'm going to tell you another story. This is the story of Fu Yajun. About 5 years ago, Fu Yajun and her husband went to work as day laborers. They would wake up at 4 a.m. every day, work 16 or 18 hours a day, just earn enough to get food for her 2 twin sons. They were lucky enough to start working on a mushroom farm where they learned the mushroom trade. And after 4 years of saving up, they were able to start their own mushroom business. They did pretty well too. They were able to sell their mushrooms out at the market, and their business was going well. But they ran into a problem. They weren't able to earn enough income to substantially increase their income and save for their children's education. And so while her business was going well, they were still stuck. She was telling her neighbor about this situation, and her neighbor let her know about our partner on the ground that not only provides loans for people like Fu Yajun, but also training and support so that they can be successful in their businesses. She was able to access a loan and start the process of building her business. This is Fu Yajun with her mushroom business. And she was able to, for the first time ever, be able to start saving for her children's education. This year, she took out a second loan to further grow that business. And that was funded by myself and about 19 other contributors from around the world. According to Fu Yajun, in the next 3 to 5 years, she'll be able to permanently get herself and her whole family out of a cycle of poverty. So when we look at, say, the situation for Fu Yajun's 2 sons compared to Chunmiao, Chunmiao is basically stuck, as opposed to Fu Yajun and her sons who will be able to go to high school, college, and have a whole new trajectory. So those are just a few numbers. But let's look at the more macro situation in China more generally. How many people would you guys say are in a situation like Chunmiao's as migrant workers living in poverty in China? Would you say it's above 20 million hands? Below 20 million? So there are actually about 120 million people in China that are living as migrant workers in major cities. What about people like Fu Yajun? How many people would you say in China in rural areas live on less than $1.25 a day? Would you say it's above 50 million? Below 50 million? There are actually 200 million people in China that are living on less than $1.25 a day. So for us here in Hong Kong, that's the equivalent to 38 times the size of the population in Hong Kong. I guess the question, though, that still comes is, why should we care about this? And why should we care about it now? I think it's really important to look, when we think about China today and China going into the future, to look at where China was 30 years ago. So back in 1979, when China first opened up its doors to the West, everyone was essentially equal. And the average income was $200 a year, or a little less than $1 a day. By today, people in urban areas in China are earning over 3 times as much as people in rural areas. And when you take into account social services, people are earning 6 times as much in urban areas as their rural counterparts. When we zoom out to 2031, if this cycle and this gap continues to keep growing, people in urban areas will be earning over 6 times as much as people in rural areas. That means someone in Beijing who's buying Apple products and living in a very urban life will be earning around $12,000 a year, while someone like Chun Miao living in a rural area will only be earning less than $2,000 a year. Once we get to that point, there'll be hundreds of millions of people that are essentially forever stuck in a cycle of poverty and won't have the ability to leap on up to a new level. So microfinance and other sustainable ways of building up rural economies are really the only way to address this issue and ensure that we don't create that gap that is basically irreversible moving forward. So let's look at the numbers of microfinance in China. So far through Wokai, we've enabled about 600 people to start the process of lifting themselves from poverty. Microfinance more generally in China has supported about 200,000 people to start the process of starting their own small businesses. But the problem they have is that there's still about 480 million people in China who don't have access to credit. The majority of those are living in rural areas. And so as we look at China in the future, this is really going to be one of the key areas that we need to focus on to ensure that we can reverse this cycle. Thank you guys very much for having me today. Feel free to either ask me questions during the workshop or after the presentation.